Katie. Yeah. So excited to be back with you today. As you probably know from yesterday, I like to use story in my presentations. And I like to use stories that I've found inspiration from my own personal journey. I'm always looking around and trying to make connections, trying to connect the dots. And this happened recently, and it was just too good not to share. So this is the first group that I've ever tried this presentation out on. What have astronauts and Patanjali got in common? But I'm hoping it won't be the last, because I'm really passionate about the whole thing. When I first got into yoga some 35 years ago, professionally, it was, as Katie said, it was about change. What makes people change? How do people change? I came to the conclusion that reading the scriptures was a great start, and it gave a lot of understanding. Knowledge does give understanding, but it doesn't really change things unless the knowledge is applied some way. I also found that a lot of the methods that were available to us came from thousands of years ago, including the practices. Not that there's anything wrong with the practices, but most of us don't have 20 years of our life to go live in an ashram so we can become enlightened. It just doesn't happen that way anymore. We live busy lives, we're out and about in the world, and so we really need, I think, to find more effective ways to derive the benefits of what something like that might do for us. And I believe there are very simple ways and very effective ways to support that change process with people. And that really has been the focus of my work for the last 30 or so years. And so coming across the astronauts recently was one of those rare moments when I had an aha moment. I have a few of them, but they're probably interspersed over several years. But this was one of them. And it started to get me thinking, and I started to connect some dots. I know all of us here in the room, when we embrace yoga as we do, we're probably looking for change. We're probably looking for a way in some way to change ourselves. And I'm sure when we walk into a class and teach, we're looking for ways to help and support our students to change. Now, we know, and I referenced this last night in my talk, we can't really change the light bulb if the light bulb doesn't want to get changed. And so on that basis, how do we set up, and this is a term I think that I borrowed from Zen and the Buddha, how do we set up the conditions arising that will support change? Because we can't guarantee it. There's no way we can guarantee that someone will change. But we can put in place, I believe, certain conditions arising that will support that process. So today I want to explore some of that in relation to both Patanjali and the astronauts. I want to focus on Patanjali's 8 limbs of yoga, a little refresher on that. I know it's probably familiar to many of you, but I want to look at it in a different context. And I particularly want to focus on the second 4 limbs and how they relate to a thing called the overview effect. Now, the overview effect I didn't know about until last year, although it's been around for about 30 years. And it really is a unique experience that astronauts have, either out there in space or not long after they return. So I want to see if I can create those connections. In life, we're often limited by our reality, how we see things, and the lens through which we look to see things. And in some ways, that can give us awareness, but it also can limit awareness. We can limit our vision, our wisdom, and even our freedom by the narrowness of the lens and by the narrowness of the view that we perceive through that lens. So I think ways to expand our lens and to look through a different lens are really part about the change process that's worth exploring. So if you watch the news from other parts of the world, and I know many of you in Australia here do that much more than we do there, which is great. You probably know that last year there were several hurricanes that hit the United States. The first one was one that struck Houston, Texas, and that happened in late August. I heard about some of the devastation and the things that were happening there as a result, and I think this photo gives you an idea of what it was like for a few days, or a little longer than that actually. And as I watched the news then, I was a little concerned because I was scheduled to go and teach a weekend workshop in Austin in about a week's time. And I'd also tacked on to the schedule, at the request of a yoga studio in Houston, an short evening presentation the night after, on the Monday evening after my weekend in Austin, and had planned to drive over from Austin to Houston. So when the hurricane hit, I thought we'd better find out what was going on. So first of all, called the place in Austin, and they said, yeah, we're okay. We haven't sustained a lot of damage, and we'd like to go ahead as planned with the workshop. So fine. Next was Houston, and I didn't think there was any likelihood that we'd be going there. I called over, and they said, yeah, we really are in a bad way, and all of our yoginis and yogis are out helping people get over the devastation and do volunteer work. And so I offered on the phone right on the spot, I said, what I'd like to do if it doesn't work out is I'd like to come back at some future time and offer a benefit workshop for you guys and for the community. I'll give my time freely, and you can put the proceeds towards the flood relief. They were very grateful of that, and then said, what we really need is something now. Would you still come? And so I said, well, if we can get there, we will. And so we went to Austin and had the weekend there, and I was keeping an eye on things, and it looked like the roads were passable. So we drove across from Austin to Houston, and without a whole lot of effort, it was a little slower than planned, but we made it. And so there I was at this yoga studio that had lost 2 of its studio rooms with damage to the floors. One was still functioning. And there was 40 or so people there. We'd been promoting all week this benefit event. We promoted it nationally by offering live streaming. So it's going to be streamed live for anyone who wanted to join us online, as well as the 40 or so people that the studio would hold. And I learned very quickly that the people had been doing amazing things, and one of the things why they wanted me to come, one of the reasons was just to basically a little self-care for them. They needed to kind of recover from working up to 16 hours a day, going out and dealing with sheetrock and damage to houses and trash like you've never seen before, and speed up the recovery. So we went ahead with the workshop. The studio also, the name of the studio was Rasa Yoga, if anyone's ever been to Houston. And it was very close to the NASA headquarters at the Johnson International Space Center in Houston. And after the workshop, we went out to have a dinner with a group of the volunteers and the people who'd been there at the workshop. And I found that there were several of them connected to NASA. And they were very excited to tell me about their experience with the workshop. And in the course of the conversation, a couple of them said, the experience that I had tonight was very similar to what I think astronauts have when they go into space. Well, this got me very curious, and I said, how come? What's that all about? And they talked a little more about it. So 2 of them said, would you like to visit NASA? I said, absolutely. They said, well, show up tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and we'll have a VIP pass for you, and we'll take you on a personally guided tour of Johnson Space Center. Well, that made my night, my day, and my year right there. And so there we are. Me, my wife, and Phil. He was one of the guys in my workshop, and Phil has actually worked in mission control for about 20 years. And he's in charge of ordnance for the space station. So his job is to make sure where every moving part is located on the space station, and should there be a problem of any kind, it's his job to talk to the astronauts on the space station and tell them where to find whatever and how to fix whatever and so on, with the help of some engineers as well. He actually is an engineer. And so he's very familiar and very comfortable with mission control and all the people there. Now those doors you see behind you, he told me not many people get to go through except the president and a few other important people. But we were destined to go through those doors, which we did. And here we are, the next slide, actually on the floor of Mission Control. There's all the stations set up, and each person sits at one of those stations and controls what's going on the space station. You can see they track the station on huge screens, and they do have the shot of the world up there on the left side of the screen, but oftentimes they actually have an inside shot of the space station. And when they were there, that's what we saw. We saw the astronauts there rolling around, weightless, going about their daily chores or whatever they're doing during the day. And I was also a little surprised to find that the space station has been inhabited continuously from the time it was put up there about 20 years ago. And there are 6 astronauts there at any given time. Right now, there are 6 up there in space on the space station. And it's an international endeavor. So there's usually a couple of Russians, a couple of Americans, and people from other participating countries, including Japan and Belgium. There may be somewhere else, the UK, I think. And so we got to tour Mission Control, and then afterwards we got to tour the actual mock-up of the shuttle that used to take people there from Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy, but all the launches now happen from Russia. And there we are inside the shuttle. We also got to see the lunar lander. And there we are in a model, a replica of the space station. The part that we're standing next to is the Russian half, and the back part is the American half. And they were both sent up there and put together in space to create the station that is now exists there, and that 6 people are on 24/7 year-round. They change over about every 3 to 6 months. So we talked a lot about the experience of the astronauts as well while we were there. And this is where I first learned about the overview effect. And this term was used 30 years ago by researcher and author Frank White, who wrote a book of the same name, Overview Effect. And he describes the overview effect as a cognitive shift in awareness that results in astronauts in space, for astronauts in space, while they're there or shortly after returning to Earth. He found that the experience often profoundly alters and affects their worldview. In interviews that he's conducted with astronauts over the years since the space program began, he's discovered that many of them describe this as an epiphany or an awakening. They gain new awareness and insight about the Earth, life upon the Earth, and are often permanently, forever changed by that experience. So it's a pretty powerful thing. It's also very clear that while they're out there, they do have a different view through the window of the spacecraft, but they also have a very different visceral experience of themselves while they're out there. They're weightless, and if you know anything about weightlessness, it's like a pretty interesting way to be. We've never experienced it, and we can't experience it here on Earth. We can't even replicate it. We can get close with, going underwater and going up in an airplane doing fancy tricks, but there's really no way to fully replace it or replicate it. So those two things are happening. I've now spent the good part of the last 6 months, a lot of my time, diving deeply into the experience of the astronauts and how it connects with the experience of the yogi. And I see a lot of links to Patanjali, particularly the upper 4 limbs of yoga, and the deep inner experiences that astronauts have. So let's do a little review of Patanjali, and then I'll see if I can connect some dots. In this diagram of the 8 limbs, I've made different colors on the first 4 to the second 4, mainly to distinguish 2 elements of the 8 limbs. First being that the first 4 are really dealing with the outer world, external practices, so to speak, and the second 4 are internal, dealing with inner experiences, or what we might call consciousness, and are much less tangible and even a little more difficult, I believe, to grasp conceptually. Now, many yogis, and probably a lot of you, see the first four as preparation for the last four. And in more traditional yoga in older days, a lot of time was spent with those first four. In fact, you had to be a pretty adept yogi before you got to even embrace or begin to embrace the second four. And here in our Western world, we know a lot about the first four because that's pretty much where a lot of our yoga studios and practices are placed. We talk about the second four, but we generally don't really set up experiences to engage them, at least as far as I'm aware in my experience of yoga in the United States. There may be a few exceptions, and there may be some here that I'm not aware of too, I'm sure. It's interesting that some people, particularly in America and probably here too, when they think of yoga, they think asana. That's the concept of what yoga is. So we even define yoga by one of these limbs and not the other seven in some ways. But we as yogis and professional yogis know that they're all important. They're all part of the same deal. I'm wondering often why that happened in America, because in the early days there was people, when I spoke yesterday, I talked about some of the gurus that went there in the 60s and 70s. They were very traditional yogis and brought yoga in all of its manifestations to the country. But over the time that eroded and we became yoga studios that focused primarily on asana. Not sure exactly why that happened. I was talking about it with someone and they said, well, maybe the gurus only taught the first four limbs because they didn't think we were really ready for the second four. That may or may not be true, I don't know. But recently there's been a much more interest in the second four, popularized, I think, by mindfulness. The whole mindfulness arena has become very big in the United States and probably is on the increase here as well. And so at least number 6 gets a little bit of attention, and 7, 6 and 7, where we talk about concentration and mindfulness. But not many people know much about pratyahara. And in fact, it's often seen as the forgotten limb of yoga. So I want to just give you a few of my takes on each of these upper four as a precursor to connecting the dots with the astronauts. But I have to warn you, if you're a yoga nerd, I tend to use pretty simplistic words and language to describe these in everyday English. So if my descriptions don't match the one that you hold dear or were taught, please forgive me and don't feel like you have to agree with mine. Feel free to disagree if it doesn't match yours and come to your own conclusions. So pratyahara is often defined as the withdrawal of the senses, but to me it's more than that. I prefer to think of it like this, as a state of being. So it's a place that we go to where we're not distracted by our sensory peripheral experience. So in any given moment, like even right now, you're sitting there and you're listening to me. That's your primary experience, maybe. But there's also a peripheral experience going on for you, which you could or could not be choosing to be distracted by. But pratyahara is where there's a single focus. In other words, we're choosing to deliberately put where the focus goes, and we become deeply absorbed in that focus. And we're not bothered by a lot of the other external distractions around us. Some experienced yogis I know can even translate pratyahara into everyday life experience, like sitting here listening, or like doing a chore, or even whittling a piece of wood or something. They can become so absorbed that it can become the complete focus and capture the full attention of their mind and every aspect of being. So I like to think of pratyahara as this deliberate focus and willingness to go more deeply into and engage the experience. It may include breath, body sensations, feelings, or anything else we might be noticing in the moment that we're choosing to focus on. Or it may be something different. It might be something external to our inner experience, like the sound of a drum beat, a chant, or a mandala. And its purpose really in the yoga system, I believe, is to provide the bridge between the first four limbs and the upper three limbs. What about these? Well, once we engage pratyahara and we become single-focused and go into that, it deepens our awareness, and we become what yogis and vipassana practitioners in the Buddhist tradition refer to as becoming more concentrated. A simple practice of dharana is tratak meditation, gazing at a candle flame. And combined with breath, this form of meditation is when the gaze is held for a long time, we can enter a state of meditative absorption and move from dharana into dhyana, which is meditation. Now, in dhyana, the seventh limb, entering this state of meditation, thought disappears. So if you're ever meditating and you think to yourself, I'm meditating, you're not. You missed the boat somewhere, or you got off the boat, put it that way. You wouldn't even know that. You would just be sustaining being present to the moment. And then if you stay there long enough, perhaps you'll begin to enter the eighth limb of samadhi. Now, samadhi is an interesting one because some of us tend to think of it or imply that samadhi is enlightenment, and enlightenment means you've reached the end of the line. Well, don't think so. I don't like to define samadhi that way. To me, it's a state of happiness and ecstasy, sure, but it's not a state of happiness and ecstasy where we're floating away to never to return, particularly if we're staying around in this world for very long. If we look at the definition of the word samadhi, literally it means to see equally. So to me, this is better described, rather than enlightenment or some end state, it's better described by the word realization. In other words, we're realizing things that we did not realize before. We have a deeper realization. And realization, it implies a deeper level of knowing, perhaps even a state of wisdom. And maybe that's why we refer to our practices sometimes as belonging to the wisdom tradition. And what is that? Well, it's a state of ease, certainly. And there isn't a lot of discomfort there. There's no discomfort or struggle with some of the external realities of being human. Things like chaos, change, impermanence. Those kind of things don't matter when we're in a state of samadhi. And this is, for many of us, a place where I'm sure there are people in this room who've visited from time to time. You've gone deeply into your practice and stayed with it. And after a while, things get very peaceful and blissful. And you begin to get insight. You begin to see things that you've never seen before. You begin to realize things that you've never realized before. And it's all okay. It's just how it is. There's no struggle. There's no distraction. It's just a beautiful acceptance of the way things are. But also a lot of wisdom around the way things are. A lot of knowing. And so, what are the conditions that enhance the unfolding of this? And if it's a place we can get to, is it a place where we can return to? And if this is an insight and wisdom, can this make a real difference to the state of our life? This greater state of equanimity, peace, resilience, courage, maybe even compassion, many other wonderful attributes that go with it. And to me, I've visited occasionally over my yogic experience. And for me, it's usually happened within the context of engaging a yoga practice of some kind or meditation. But I believe from the limited experience that I have, these limbs are all interrelated. They're not linear. It doesn't happen. One happens, the next, the next, the next, in a very defined order. They're really something that all kind of interweave and happen in a kind of a random way. Some days they're easier to get into, some days they're not. Some days they appear and disappear very quickly. So there's no real, I guess, defined pattern to it. I don't think it's too difficult to see why going to this state can be helpful to our lives. Just the calming effect alone and the equanimity is one thing, but as well as that, there's greater clarity, insight, and wisdom. And for many of us living in our day-to-day struggle, it's a struggle just to meet all the needs that exist in our world. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to earn an income. We have to maintain relationships. We have to take care of our health and our well-being. And we're constantly bombarded with numerous distractions and opportunities to escape. We live in a world where it's very easy to create a reality that has pain included in the journey, particularly if we practice escapism. Some of the work that Nikki talked about this morning and her awareness and understanding of the disease of addiction really struck home to me, because I see how easy it is for someone to slip into that road when the going gets too rough or too tough. It's just an easy way to deal with it. And it's an effective way. In the short term it works. In the long term it just creates greater pain and suffering. So in our modern world we're very prone to that journey. So visiting samadhi occasionally can be a very useful way for us to reassure ourselves that all is well just as it is, even with the chaos and the confusion and everything else that's going on. And perhaps a better way to make sense of it all, a better way to choose how we want to be with it all, rather than slipping into escapism. So there's good reasons to go there. There's good reasons to see how it applies to life. And it can make a different state of being for us. And ultimately, I believe, create a different kind of world if there's enough of us there. And I believe that many of the astronauts have made this leap in a different way. But the same things are really what are happening for them. They just do it in a different way. But I believe it's very much the same as those of us get to through deeper practices of yoga. We may even get glimpses of it from time to time without being yoga practitioners. We may have a moment of tenderness in a relationship and feel a deep and genuine connection with another human being. In a way, that's a glimpse of samadhi. We may do something in an act of generosity for someone or some group of people, and we feel moved by our own act of generosity. We can feel a connection, a deeper connection to the state of humanness. And that's a moment, that's a glimpse. Or we may be on the receiving end of an act of generosity or compassion, and we feel touched that another human being could be there and support us in that beautiful way. We can listen to profound words in poems and stories, or the words of inspiring teachers. And these can feel great and kindle a spirit of joy and hope within us. These may even inspire us to move in new directions and to seek change in our lives, these glimpses of higher consciousness. At some point, though, if we want more than just a fleeting glimpse, I believe that we have to embrace real change. And real change really demands that we engage some kind of experience to get it. And I emphasize that word, experience. Knowledge alone will not give us the experiences that we need to engage these higher order limbs and to begin to see reality in a different way and through a different lens. So there's a difference, I believe, between triggering real and lasting change and just intellectually making peripheral or temporary changes that don't last. Think, for example, about the last time you made a New Year's resolution or went on a diet. All right, great idea. And you were very successful, perhaps, in creating this peripheral change. But after a while, the same old kicked back in, and there we go. till the next time we make a resolution or go on a diet. Now, I'm not saying that some of us can actually endure through willpower and actually get to the other side of that and create for ourselves in the process a knowing through experience that what we are doing by following a particular diet actually does something for us. And that in itself is the experience that can provoke lasting change. But we're more complex creatures than perhaps we think or we allow ourselves to experience. And our intellect is great, but it can often fool us in thinking we know how to figure everything out just by thinking about it and making a plan and putting it into action. But our body, our spirit, and our deeper levels of knowing often don't get engaged or go for the ride with it. Unless one day we're fortunate to stumble into an experience like the astronauts do. For many of us, that may be stumbling into a yoga experience, which at first may be just a physical thing, and it could stay at that level. Or we may engage some of the deeper aspects of practices. And this can sometimes be facilitated, this kind of awareness, by a skilled teacher or yoga therapist who can structure an experience that will take us there in some way. And we walk out affected. We've had a new glimpse. We've looked through a different lens. We've seen a different view. We've engaged the experience of yoga. But let's head back for a moment to the astronauts. See what they say about this experience. Here are 3 of them. Now, it's interesting that astronauts are very clever and intelligent people. They only choose the best for this job. But not many of them make serious, significant change before they go into space. Doesn't happen. Yet they're smart people. Why not? They don't change here on Earth, but when they go out there, they change, or shortly after they return. Take these quotes, for example. Edgar Mitchell, "I not only saw the connectedness, I felt it. I was overwhelmed with a sensation of physically and mentally extending out into the cosmos, an awesome process." Edward Gibson, "You see how diminutive your life and concerns are." Interesting. How diminutive your life and concerns are compared to other things in the universe. When you look at the big picture, you look at this new reality through a different view, you see different things. The result is that you enjoy the life that is before you. This life becomes all of a sudden precious, more precious. It allows you to have inner peace. The last one is Anusha Ansari, and she was actually a space tourist. It is possible, anyone wants to go, but if you pay enough money, you can get a ride. You can go visit the shuttle and live there for about 2 weeks with the astronauts. She was one who chose to do that. And she had an experience while there. It was a short one, but she still had enough time there to say it sort of reduces things to a size that you think everything is manageable. We can do this. That's what she came back with. We can do this. Peace on earth. Yes, no problem. It gives people that type of energy, that type of power. And I've experienced that. So I'm struck by these descriptions and how close they parallel some of the teachings in our yoga philosophy, the teachings of the Buddha, and in other spiritual traditions. Notice also that there's a level of humility in these quotes, humility that we don't often experience here on our day-to-day life. And there's a willingness to feel deeply and to consider a new possibility, a new way of being. That's huge. That's what the yogis do. There is a new way to be, a different way to be. It's why many of us are here. To me, these kinds of insights and experience are similar to the ones that go with enlightenment or in spiritual practice. So I think you can probably see how a yogi like me could easily get hooked onto space and astronauts after learning this. And it went even a step further. I am a full-time yogi, but I do have a hobby job. I've been an aviation nut for many years. I love to fly airplanes, and I am a flight instructor. And my hobby job is teaching kids how to fly airplanes and how to embrace aviation as a tool for life. In fact, my favorite line when I'm teaching kids is to tell them that learning to fly is where freedom and responsibility come together. You get a lot of freedom flying an airplane, but you also know that it's bought with a lot of responsibility. And they get that. And then they begin to go off and apply it to their lives in all kinds of ways. So it's not just about flying an airplane, it's about flying in life. So at an education conference, because I'm also interested in education in many different ways, and new methods of learning, new ways to create experiences that help people learn. That's another one of my passions. So at an aviation in education conference, I met Nicole Stott. There she is. An astronaut. She was one of the presenters at this conference. So I invited her to come to the private boarding school in my home area of Western Mass where I teach aviation and to give an inspirational talk to the school community. She agreed, and in January this year, just a few months ago, she came, and I enjoyed hosting her and her company for the best part of 2 days, from the time I picked her up at the airport and took her back. It was a fascinating time for me and gave me a chance to get first-hand, up-close information in my new passion about astronauts. So during the 2 days we were there, we had a lot of conversations about her experience in space, including her 106 days that she spent on the space station. She described in detail sitting next to the window and looking back at Earth. This, in fact, was her favorite pastime while she was out there. She said she would lose track of time very quickly, and she had to set an alarm to remind herself when it was time to re-engage her tasks for the day. She'd just become mesmerized by the experience of sitting and looking out the window. She was seeing the Earth and the universe through a different lens, and it was captivating. I don't know if you know that, but on the space station they see sunrise and sunset 9 times a day. Pretty awesome. Makes my flight back to California look pretty insignificant. So it was also giving rise for her to insight and awareness in a non-intellectual way that few human beings ever get to experience. She did say that there was visceral embodied experience, and that was important in what happened for her. She also described how things changed while she was there, as she settled in to the state of being weightless and the state of looking through a window and seeing a very unfamiliar view. She described that when they first arrived on the space station, which, as I said earlier, is international, each one of the astronauts would look out the window and try to find home. Okay. And they defined home as where they lived or where their family lived down there on the planet. Nicole would look for Florida, in the shape of Florida, which is where her son and her husband were while she was out there on the space station. But after a few weeks there, she realized that something changed with all of that. As they bonded as a crew, and as they all looked at that same Earth back there, they began to see it differently. They saw the Earth as their home, not where they happened to be on the Earth. Their individual homes became less significant in the context of this new affiliation with the whole planet as their home. Nicole now describes herself clearly as a citizen of the world. The godparent of her son is a Russian. She travels there and to other places in the world frequently to reconnect with friendships she made during her time as an astronaut. She cares deeply about the environment and about relationships at a personal, national, and global level. She gives hundreds of talks every year to groups ranging from children in classrooms to executives in boardrooms and to large industry conferences. She shares openly about her experience in space, the difficulties, the joys, and more than anything else, the learning that came home with her. So, she was interviewed by Frank White for the revision of his book, which came out a year or two back, of The Overview Effect. I asked her if it was common for most astronauts to experience things like she did. She said it affected all of them in different ways, but they all returned. In fact, the statistics now, I believe, that I'm gathering, out of the 435 that have gone out there since the space program began, over 400 of them describe a profound shift. That's a lot. And it often led them to doing different things and seeing things differently and taking action to match that when they got back here on Earth. One of Nicole's favorite projects is to create these spacesuits. Here's an astronaut wearing one. Where do these come from? Well, this particular spacesuit is a hand-sewn one that goes over to the regular spacesuit, and it's hand-sewn at the MD Anderson Cancer Treatment Center in the children's wards in Houston, Texas. She started this project as one of her ways of giving back. Children undergoing cancer treatment, probably one of the most difficult things for anyone to observe or watch, or for a parent to have to endure. And it's a path that's often doesn't have a lot of hope and is a very, I guess, difficult treatment process. So hope for these kids is really important part of their healing. So what they do is they each make a patch, and that patch is woven together in this suit, and then the kids get to see, courtesy of a feed from NASA, they get to see an astronaut wearing their suit in space. And sometimes it's even outside the station in a spacewalk. And it really supports inspiration, joy, and hope for these kids in their healing journey. But let's come back again to the conditions, and particularly the 8 limbs, and try and connect too a little bit back to the first 4 limbs. Because after I'd looked at this for a while, I thought it's not just the first 4 limbs of yoga, it's all of them. They all are in play here with these guys. So we know in Patanjali's model, before you engage the upper 4 limbs, you need to focus on the first 4. And the training that astronauts receive, I believe, is very much similar in many ways to the first 4. One of my visions is actually to get more involved in this, and I'd like to be part of a team that puts together a program for the Mars mission astronauts before they go. And I'm hopeful that would happen, because I believe also, just as a side, that if the astronauts did practice more yoga before they went, it might be really helpful, particularly if it was geared towards preparing them for the kind of experiences they're going to have. For now, though, I know that a lot of their training are very much disciplines not unlike a sadhana practice that we would normally engage. They prepare themselves mentally, physically, and I believe also to some extent spiritually for the experience that they're about to engage when they step onto the launch pad. And Nicole described this experience. She said, the launch is unbelievable. There's nothing that can prepare you for that experience. You feel like about 4 people are sitting on top of you all at once. Now, until recently, a lot of the astronauts were Navy SEALs. That's changed, and still a lot of them are, but not all of them, not as many as they used to be. And a few years ago, I kind of got a little curious about Navy SEAL training, which is not unlike astronaut training. And someone gave me a little book called The Heart and the Fist, written by a guy called Eric Greitens, who was an ex-Navy SEAL and became a philanthropist, traveling around the world doing good stuff for people after he'd left the Navy SEALs. This person said to me, you should read this. It has a lot of parallels to your yoga therapy work. So I read it, and I decided, yes, it did indeed have parallels, and it was a very fascinating book. One of the things that really struck me was how in some ways it was very akin to certain Buddhist teachings. Here's some Navy SEALs, and they don't look very comfortable. They don't look very comfortable because this is getting towards the end of their training. One of the endurance tests that they go through is to spend a whole night from sunset to sunrise up to their neck in water in a bay off San Diego where the water is very cold. And they have two options. They either stay there and pass the test, or they run up onto the beach and quit, and their Navy SEAL training comes to an end so close to their graduating. Greitens talks about it like this. He describes in detail his own inner struggle during this time in the cold water, and how many of his colleagues who he thought were both physically and mentally tougher than he was walked up onto the beach and gave up. But he made it by using one simple practice: present-centered, embodied focus, and not allowing any distracting thoughts to enter his mind. He engaged pratyahara, as I see it. What he said he did, he recalled first of all feeling the fear of the cold water, feeling the fear of hypothermia, and how tough it was to endure the unrelenting approach of the supervising team. So he decided to just become single-focused. And what he chose as his mantra was the phrase, "It's only water. It's only water." And he said that over and over and over for about 6 hours and made it. Notice he didn't even use the word cold to describe the water. So I invite you to try it sometimes under a cold shower. See if you're a real yogini. Trust me, I've tried it, and it does work, but it's not easy. So what about the yamas and niyamas for the astronauts? Well, I was surprised when I visited NASA that there was a real amazing camaraderie there, a strong code of ethics, and a climate that prevailed throughout the whole organization that was very affirming and very positive. It was clear that the astronauts and the people who supported them were a unique band of people. They held high moral principles, a strong sense of obligation to their fellow man, and a willingness to take on the impossible and make it work in service to others. And the whole organization supports these strong values. This is probably what people spoke of back in the early days of the moon, when they talked about the astronauts of being people who had the right stuff. The right stuff is really the yamas and niyamas. So what are some of the elements also that are in common that change their lives? As a Zen teacher might ask, what are the conditions arising that support this? One of the things I believe is top of the list is direct experience. Those of you who practice somatic therapy of any form probably have heard somatic therapists talk about direct experience. It's an experience that's in the moment, present-centered, and usually embodied and aware. If you ever blissed out in a yoga class or in a meditation and felt kind of strange in a good way afterwards, you've probably had a direct experience. Another way to define it, deeply present, using present-centered awareness, free of distractions to engage oneself fully. Again, not unlike pratyahara. In that experience, you may notice things external to your world or your inner world that you've never noticed before. In my particular focus on yoga therapy, Phoenix Rising, part of our job as facilitators is to support our clients in engaging direct experience. It's really what the session, the yoga therapy session, is about. And we train our practitioners to facilitate that. In other words, to make it easy for someone to enter that form of direct experience. And we see amazing things happen there. Most of my own personal awakenings or awarenesses that have come through yoga have come through direct experience. And the astronaut experience is ideally set up for this. They're embodied but weightless. They're in an enclosed space, kind of like a yoga retreat, I guess, in some ways. Although the scenery is very different. And they're there for a long duration of time. There are limited distractions. Not much to get distracted by up there. Can't go out on the town. Right? And they're there for, as I said, a long time. There's the weightless. That's what it's like when you're weightless and what happens to your hair. And to sleep comfortably, this is a great one. To sleep comfortably, they have to use Velcro to attach themselves to the wall or the floor. Otherwise, they just float around all night bumping into stuff. All right. And I won't tell you about their bathroom, but that's something else. Talk about a vacuum cleaner. Wow. But for us non-astronauts engaging yoga, we have a different physical experience of ourselves when we engage yoga. Think about engaging yoga practice and not engaging a yoga practice. Your body experiences differently. You're not weightless, but you do have very different body awarenesses and body sensations and body experiences than when engaging other life habits. We inhabit our body in new ways. And we know this is a great help. In fact, Moshe Feldenkrais built a whole theory around different habitual patterns that change through body movement and body engagement. We experience our body differently. And then, of course, there's the looking out the window of the spacecraft. And like Nicole, this is the favorite pastime for many astronauts. They're looking at the Earth from a space presents a whole different perspective, but it's not just a different perspective, it's also a different lens. And not only do they see things differently, but relate to it differently as well. If we go deep in our yoga practice, and if we do allow it to present us with insight and awareness, and we do take that awareness and connect the dots to our life, it gives us much the same possibility. We get to see ourselves and our life through a different lens and get a different view of it. It's often so profoundly different that the old way of being is no longer valid. Is there anyone in the room that can look back and say, I'm different now than I was 20, 30 years ago? Yeah. And if you've been a yoga practitioner for that time, maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe you've begun to see things differently, because there are people who go through their whole life and don't change a whole lot of things. But we do. We change all the time. As I often say jokingly, it's the same old new me. But the new me is always popping up. But there's real significant change. And I can attest to that personally. For me personally, I've changed. And I've seen it happen. And yoga has been the path. And once we get this new insight, this new awareness, there's really no turning back. We begin to express ourselves in the world in a different way, just the way the astronauts do when they return to Earth. So, in our day-to-day yoga, I won't talk too much about the yoga therapy experience that we engage. That would take a whole nother keynote or more. But there are things I think that we can take away in terms of how we engage our own practice of yoga that can help with all of this. Meaningful yoga practice suggestions for using it as a vehicle or a tool for life. First thing I'd say is integrate your yoga and meditation with your life. Don't separate it out. Many of us are closet yogis. You know, our yoga and meditation practice is kind of separate from the rest of our life, and we break it off, keep it separate. Try not to do that if possible. Try to be upfront about your yoga practice and engage it openly and not separately so that it becomes, in fact, a part of your life. And use your life as a daily practice as well as your yoga as a daily practice. Your life is one of the best practices you have if you engage it with consciousness, awareness, and curiosity. You also have to have a good deal of non-judgment, and you have to basically say to yourself, I'm a human being and I struggle, and I've got my unresolved and undealt with issues. And that's okay, because that's part of being human. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to embrace that, not run away from it. I will embrace my humanness, and I will allow it to teach me. I will learn from it. That's a yogi. Be clear every morning how you want to show up in your life that day. Who do you want to be that day? How do you want to show up? How do you want to affect the people around you and the people you engage? And what might be one small practice that you can use to support that? I've done this many times over. When I do my hand-to-heart meditation every day and ask my body, because my body gives a much more truthful answer than my head does. And I ask my body, how do I want to show up in life today? And it tells me. If, for example, it says, greater compassion. That's come up a few times. Greater compassion. Okay, so what am I going to do about greater compassion? I'm going to find someone who's struggling who I can have compassion for. Anyone I see today who's having a hard time, I'm going to validate their hard time rather than try and talk them out of it. I'm going to invite them to be with that and to be comfortable with it, or some way of being compassionate and sharing my knowing that they're having a hard time. Not trying to fix them, just being there with them. That's one thing that I've done in the past that works. And there are many others that I won't go into in detail. Be real in your yoga and in your life. And particularly beware of premature transcendence. What's premature transcendence? Okay, it's really, again, where you are part of a yoga community and everyone in the yoga community is so spiritual and so wonderful. It looks like everyone's just floating around with a smile on their face. But you know there's a whole lot of shit going on underneath that smile. So my invitation to you, is to say, engage the muck. Get in there with it. Don't pretend it's not there. And don't pretend that you live in a group of people who've all transcended and gone to heaven. You wouldn't be here on this earth if you didn't have work to do. This earth is a schoolroom for life. That's what it is. And if it's a schoolroom, let's take the curriculum. And that means looking at our unevolved parts. Change it up and be open to other vehicles. Learn about what serves you, not necessarily what you like, or not necessarily what some teacher told you you should do. What works for you? Can you discern that? Can you figure that out? And can you make your practices match that? And when you work with students, can you do that for them rather than say, oh, this is the right way, this is how you should do this, you have to do this, you have to do that, da-da-da-da-da. Another list of instructions is probably not going to help. But helping them engage themselves in a way to discern what's going to work for them, that works. But it does take work. It's not an easy out. It's not just, oh, I'll do this because it's easy. No. If you're doing what works, you're probably going to be doing stuff that's not easy. It will take effort. It will take commitment. It will take resolve. For me personally, I know that I have to move every morning before I do anything else. So for me, my practice has to happen the minute I get out of bed. That's where it starts. And it starts with a lot of vigorous movement because I'm a kapha and I have to get the batteries like hitting the sparks before anything else is going to happen. So I move vigorously for about 10 minutes. And then I begin to engage a yoga practice. And then I'll engage meditation. And then I might go for a walk. And I might come back, and I always finish with my hand to heart. How am I going to show up today? But that'll change on different days, because some days I tune into my body, and it's telling me, do your practice later. Get out there and go for that walk, even though it's 20 degrees outside. That's 20 Fahrenheit. It's about minus 10 in your scale. I don't walk if it's colder than about minus 10. It's only air. Connect and engage with yourself. That's the other thing. Connect and engage with yourself. In other words, you've got to have a relationship with you to do this work, to walk this path. You've got to know yourself. You've got to be curious about it, and you've got to like it. If you don't like yourself, you're going to have a hell of a hard time liking anybody else. And if you don't like anybody else, you probably don't like yourself. So a great place to start is with you. Get over the unevolved places. Use dialogue and introspection, but without self-absorption. Don't make it all about you because you're introspective. Also extend out to others as well, others who are less fortunate, others who are struggling like you. Find some time for them, but at the same time, find time for yourself. Here's one: stop doing yoga. Okay? Yoga is not something you do, it's something you engage. And it's a moment-to-moment experience of yourself more than anything else. So start engaging it. It's not something to check off your checklist. Oh, I've done my yoga today. Aren't I good? Wow. Now I get to go do whatever I want to do. It's not like that. It's engaging it moment to moment. Validate and affirm yourself and others daily for being human. I think I might have covered that one. And it's part of the ride, and enjoy the ride. And lastly, act on the insights that come to you and trust your gut. If you're really tuning into yourself, you're going to have a knowing beyond what your mind knows, and it's probably a more truthful knowing than your mind knows. So that's it for the advice. I don't usually give advice, but when I do, I usually base it on what's worked for me, and all of those things clearly have. I like to take inspiration from the astronauts in my life because they've dared to venture beyond the confines of guaranteed safety and fully engage the experience. They've returned here as worthy and worthwhile citizens of our planet Earth, and they care. They care about life and how we do it together. And when we do our practice, we join them in a way. We're part of that same paradigm. We can change our lens and we can see things differently without ever leaving the ground. We can do it here. And I hope in the future that these higher aspects of consciousness that are part of yoga become a little more widespread, more accepted and more available, and more easily facilitated for others. And that's where I see we have a role. We are the facilitators of the yogic experience for others, the kind of experience that will potentially change lives. More and more people are seeking now to make meaningful change in their lives, and they don't really know the way. And if they do, if they are able to make the shift, first at a personal level, it will ultimately spread to their relationship with others, which will ultimately spread to more others on a global level. So in a way, working one body at a time, we are changing the world one body at a time. And just like the astronauts are astronauts, we can be innernauts. Innernauts, you like that one? Yeah. We can use our inner experience in here, like they use their outer experience out there, to make a difference in our world. And I'd like to draw inspiration from this short video that came out a few years ago on the passing of Edgar Mitchell.
had completed my major task for going to the moon and was on the way home and was observing the heavens and the earth from this distance, observing the passing of the heavens as we were rotating. I saw the earth, the sun, the moon, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens. The magnificence of all of this, what this triggered in my visioning, in the ancient Sanskrit, is called samadhi. It means that you see things with your senses the way they are, but you experience them viscerally and internally as a unity and a oneness accompanied by ecstasy. All matter in our universe is created in star systems. And so the matter in my body and the matter in the spacecraft and the matter in my partner's bodies was the product of stars. We are stardust. And we're all one in that sense.
Yeah, that kind of says it all. And it's going to go on. And that's one of the wonderful things, I think, about living at this time when we do. Only just a few weeks ago, this happened. Remember that? Elon Musk has sent a Tesla to Mars. One day there probably will be somebody sitting in it. But regardless, I think the thing that we have is our opportunity to make a difference with ourselves, for each other, for our world, to become the inner naughts like the astronauts. Thank you. I'm going to take questions. For those of you who are in my workshop either yesterday or today, if you have any questions about any of that or anything else that may have come across your radar as we engaged the conversation yesterday or today, we have a little time left, so we can take a few questions. So if anyone wants to, just stand up and maybe come up the front and shout out your question. Or no, someone's got a mic, right? Yeah, we got a mic. So when you raise your hand, someone will come and give you the mic, and you can speak. Anyone? Okay, here's Lee.
I was waiting to see whether somebody might ask a more yearly question, so I'm just going to ask a more everyday one. I was curious about the security of you being able to have those photographs in mission control behind the sealed doors. How did that all go?
Yeah. NASA is now no longer has the mission of being part of a military operation. It's actually a mission of peace, and it's able to be open in certain ways without being crazy about it. You know, they don't want someone walking in there who may, want to bring them down or anything like that. So there's security there. There is security. In fact, I had to get a security clearance and go through 2 security checks to get in there to begin with on the day that we went. And I got to go in through the doors because I was with someone who actually works on that floor. But if I wasn't, I'd be up on a catwalk taking a different tour. Both are valuable. If you ever go to Houston, take the tour. It's well worth it. So yeah, they were fairly open, and they answered questions very openly as well about the experience. So yeah, I'm going to be working more with them, I hope, and finding out a whole lot more. But yeah, I really enjoyed the time I was there. Up there, yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that you may or may not be involved with the
Yes.
astronauts that are heading to Mars. So what sort of yoga would you be teaching? All the 8 limbs, or just asana?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't really thought in depth about it, but I am working with the guy Phil that you saw on this video, on the slides. His wife, Carrie, was for many years involved in astronaut training, and she's now a freelancer. Works in the community near NASA, but one of her things now that she does, she runs a space camp for kids, which is interesting. But she is still peripherally involved in astronaut training, and she's also a yoga teacher. And so her and I are working on a proposal to come up with the answer to your question. And we haven't given it a lot of thought yet, but my preliminary thinking is that going to Mars takes about 9 months. From what they can estimate, they don't really know for sure yet. By the time they get there, it may be different. And it's going to be in a much smaller enclosed space than the space station. It'll just be in a capsule because they can't send a big thing like the space station that far. So it'll be in a very, very small enclosed space. It'll only be a few people, and they'll be gone for a long time. And they'll undergo much more difficult conditions and changes, and they'll also see more than has ever been seen before by any human being. So how do you prepare for that? What kind of things would help that? That's the question I'm asking myself. And if I was engaging a practice for myself, what would I want to do? What would I want? What would I need? And I think I'd need to get real comfortable with myself, get real comfortable with whoever happened to be inhabiting that small space with me, and to find ways to take time each day to really center myself and to really become connected in a way that would set me up for success that day. And also all the things, all the the input that was coming, and not being able to make sense of that, to get really comfortable with that too. And so probably a lot of embodied practice, probably a lot of breathing, probably a lot of self-awareness, self-engagement, introspection, but at the same time, a lot of acceptance of just about everything and getting comfortable with that. And I think that can come through through deeper practices, through engaging those upper 4 limbs. So I'd be also trying to facilitate the kind of embodied experience that can generate insight and awareness. And be asking the question of them, how do they want to be with this? And have them with a clear intention and a clear way as to how they wanted to engage the experience. That's my initial thoughts, and that may change. Yeah. Thank you. The others?
Yeah, hi. I'm over here, Michael.
Yes, hi.
No, over to your left.
Oh.
I'm waving up the back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Now I got you.
I just, what you were just saying then made me think, gosh, I think we're all trying to achieve that, and we're all trying to, achieve those outcomes over the many years of our practice.
Yes.
And so I wonder if having a really major purpose like these astronauts have got, do you think that will make their exploration and perhaps their achievements, will that assist their process?
Yeah, I think it'll change. I think it will certainly change the process. Yeah, I think their willingness to engage is very strong. You think about it. I mean, even the guys that went to the moon the first time, and I didn't know this until I talked to people. They did not know for sure if they could get them back. There was no guarantee that they would walk on that moon and be able to make it back to the capsule. In fact, they were only minutes away from not being able to make it. If they'd have taken another couple of minutes to land on the moon, they'd have used up the fuel that they needed to get back to the station in orbit. And so anything could happen going to Mars. I mean, it's a dangerous thing. And they're aware of that. And they'll take that fear. That's another aspect I think that's worth considering. How do you deal with that fear? They all do. They all do in a way, but they don't really have any preparation for that in a mind-body way. And I think the mind-body practices can really help that. How do we deal with fear now? You know, where are the fears? What are the fears? Even expressing them, you know, is a helpful part of the process. So, yeah, it'll be different. But yes, I agree with you that many of us would like to create that in our own life. And probably the process is the same. You know, there's no guarantee that we're going to be sitting here in a year's time. You know, we probably will, many of us, but some of us won't. Maybe. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that on a day-to-day basis? You know, it's part of life. And I think our practices help us with that too.
Hi, Michael. I got a question for you. Sorry, down the back as well.
Hi.
It's a bit deceptive with the microphone. I was just thinking about your story with the Navy SEALs. And there's a book I just begun reading called Stilling Fire. And the premise of the book sort of really looks at this idea of ecstasis, a state of flow that yes. You can enter. And a lot of the book a lot of the start of the book spends time with Navy SEALs, because that's actually an aspect of Navy SEALs that they're really curious about studying, when as a group they're able to forget about their own ego mm-hmm. and enter into a sense of unity with mm-hmm. those around them. Mm-hmm. And obviously in this case they become an incredibly effective killing machine, which obviously is not terribly in the spirit of the sutras. But this idea of ecstasis is really quite fascinating.
Yes.
And this loss of ego. If you could talk to that, perhaps.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, that's a great one. And I did come across that in learning about them. And it's a state of being, and it's a state of being that again comes about through the capacity to be present to what is. And in being present to what is, to make a lot of discerning choices that have the best shot at the outcome that they're looking for. Now, if you think about this in life, in everyday life we make choices. And our choices are based on what we think will work. But if we're not good at discerning, we're going to go up a lot of blind alleys. And each time we go up a blind alley, if we're good at it, we'll learn from that and we'll adjust next time. That's what learning's about. But sometimes we don't, because we resist the learning, so we repeat the same things over and over that don't work. And Navy SEALs, in a way, are taught to do the exact opposite. They're taught to be very clear upon the outcome they desire and very clear about what will best facilitate that possibility. And one of them is if they work as a team. If they don't work as a team, they're all doomed, in a way. So that becomes highly regarded as one of the choices is, above all else, to work as a team. The other thing is that they learn discernment skills. That also is part of their training. And discernment skills is being able to see what's going on in an instant, to take in the reality of the moment and to see it, similar to what the astronaut sees, to see it as it is, not the way you think it might be, not the way you would like it to be, not the way it was last time, not the way it was or might be in the future, but just as it is now. And given what's happening now, what choice is going to create the outcome that's in line with what I'm wanting to achieve? High-level discernment, and in fact, I believe, part of the wisdom tradition. That's what I think, the Navy SEALs have in common with the Buddha. It's very much the same stuff. The Navy SEALs are trained unlike any other branch of the military. In other branches of the military, it's all about when this happens, you do this. When this happens, you do that. When this happens, you do that. There's a system and a way of doing everything for everything. The Navy SEALs is completely off the map with all of that. It's like you have no idea what you're going to face. You have no idea how to respond. You have to be able to size up the situation in an instant, see what's going on, and make the right choice. I don't know if any of you have watched the movie American Sniper, but there's a moment in that, if you've ever seen that movie. It's not an easy movie to watch, but it does look at that aspect of human beingness, making that right choice in the right moment. It's a tough one. Does that answer it? Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it is. And flow is a great concept too. And I believe yogis and yoginis, we've got a better chance of getting to flow the longer we go with our practice, the more we're going to get into flow. And flow is that state of being where the world stays the same. The world doesn't change around us. It's not changing. But we're changing how we're being with it. We're changing how we're flowing with it. We can flow with the chaos. We can flow with the ups and downs. Equanimity is really another way of talking about flow. Any others? One more.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned 430 over here on the other side.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
You mentioned there's been 435 astronauts into space.
Yes.
Of which over 400 have some kind of conscious awareness.
Yeah.
Does that include Russians and the other countries as well?
Yes, it does.
So they've actually got a similar sort of relation?
Yes. Yeah, it includes from any nationality. Yeah. They've all had similar experiences. There's actually, in the Overview Effect book, Frank White interviews quite a lot of Russians as well as Americans, and they describe very similar experiences. I won't go there. Yeah, I think there's a lot of people we'd like to send for a ride out there. Or maybe we'd like to get them into a yoga class. Yeah. I have a friend who ended up being Hillary Clinton's nutritional advisor and doctor. And I figure if he can do that, maybe he'll help me figure out how I can get Donald onto the mat for a yoga therapy session. Okay, well, thank you so much. Appreciate it, and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.